Hey, what's up, Optimal Nation? Welcome to another episode of the Optimal Health Show. In this week's podcast, I got my good friend, Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, to drop by. And we're going to be talking about ketosis, ketogenic diets, and the molecular actions that actually happens in your body when you eat a ketogenic diet. Now, Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, he is a PhD doctor and assistant professor at the University of South Florida College of Medicine. He teaches courses in molecular pharmacology, physiology, and maintains involvement in several studies in researching metabolic treatments for neurological disorders such as Alzheimer's, ALS, and cancer. So Dr. Dominic D'Agostino really knows this stuff. But before we actually get today's podcast, I got a couple of things. Number one, I want to give a huge shout out to this week's Optimal Health Warrior, which is Moira Anderson. Moira, keep up the amazing work. You're doing a fantastic job. Second thing, if you haven't already, please head over to iTunes, leave a review. The more reviews we have, the greater impact we can have on this world. So without further ado, please sit back and relax and enjoy today's amazing podcast with Dr. Dominic D'Agostino. Hey, Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I remember I was listening to your show with Carl Honor and previously before with Dave Asprey from the Bulletproof Executive, and I love the whole aspect of combining modern day science and really breaking away the misbeliefs people have that a ketogenic diet is unhealthy or it's not safe for you. So once again, thank you so much for coming on the show, and hopefully we're going to clear the fog today and really get to the bottom line facts, the real science facts that shows the ketogenic diet is actually quite beneficial for you. So before we actually begin, I'm just really curious, what got you interested in the whole ketosis science behind this?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ameer. What got me interested specifically was the project, that I was funded to do through the Office of Navy Research. Was they had an interest in preventing what's known as central nervous system oxygen toxicity, or CNS oxygen toxicity for short. And when a diver breathes enriched oxygen in a hyperbaric environment, which would be under the water, there's an increase in oxygenation to the brain. And oxygen's a neural stimulant and can trigger a seizure. And there's no way to predict or prevent the onset of CNS oxygen toxicity. And it's a limitation for people who use rebreathers when they dive, and especially the special operations guys, the Navy SEALs. They use these rebreathers that helps them evade detection. So when they're underwater, there's no bubbles coming up. So they use this, and if they go down just 50 feet of seawater, they can get a seizure in 10 minutes. So obviously that's a big impediment for their safety and completing the mission. So it's a complete mystery as to why this occurs, and we looked into a variety of different mitigation strategies to prevent the oxygen seizures. And in the process of looking at that, I stumbled across the ketogenic diet because it's used for drug refractory or drug-resistant epilepsy. And, I stumbled upon this literature. I was very familiar with low-carb diets for body composition alterations and that nature. But I didn't know that the ketogenic diet originated to control seizures. So I delved into the early research and how it evolved, and I saw this as a potent strategy to prevent these oxygen seizures. But I wanted to not only understand the diet mechanism, but to develop and test ketogenic agents that could be administered orally as a means to circumvent the dietary restriction that's typically needed to produce nutritional ketosis. So sort of like the ketogenic diet in a pill. That was for a military application. So just to make it clear though, my research is really focused on the ketogenic diet. Now, ketone supplementation is something different, but we can actually combine that with a ketogenic diet that, for example, is not very strict or carbohydrate restricted, but still elevate ketones to boost ketones so you can get the benefits of the ketogenic diet without necessarily the really strict carbohydrate restriction that typically needs to be sustained to elevate ketones.
Now, a lot of my listeners, they understand that, to to get into ketosis, you have to be fairly low carb, higher on the fat side and lower on the protein side, because the protein may stimulate through gluconeogenesis to create sugars, right?
Yeah.
So that being said, we have certain ketones, acetoacetate or hydroxybutyrate, and they'll change from acetoacetate to hydroxybutyrate. Is there any certain intermediaries that actually will contribute to that change for the bioavailable form of ketones within our blood?
So your bioavailable forms would be beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate. Now, when we measure blood ketones, we're measuring the blood levels of beta-hydroxybutyrate. And when we measure urine ketones, we're measuring acetoacetate. So beta-hydroxybutyrate is thought to be the predominant ketone body in the blood. And essentially why that occurs is because beta-hydroxybutyrate is a more stable molecule. But for beta-hydroxybutyrate to be used as an energy source, it needs to break down to acetoacetate, and then it can be used for cellular respiration. Acetoacetate can spontaneously decarboxylate to acetone. Now we think of acetone as a waste product because we exhale it. It gives you the fruity odor in your breath, but acetone also has unique signaling properties on the brain. So it can actually prevent hyperexcitability of the brain and can be neuroprotective in some ways. But when we talk about a fuel source, acetoacetate and beta-hydroxybutyrate do both provide a source of fuel for the body. Now, you can develop there's really no way that I know of to alter that ratio in your body. From a nutritional ketosis point of view, and meaning carbohydrate restricted ketosis, I know of no way to actually change the ratio of beta-hydroxybutyrate to acetoacetate. Although what we're doing is developing supplements that could make that possible. But from a just nutritional ketosis point of view, I don't see it might not be that important, but we do find that acetoacetate may have unique anti-seizure effects, primarily because it can break down to acetone more readily, and that has anti-seizure effects.
What I find interesting, though, is some people can really adapt well to the ketogenic diet, meaning give it a couple of weeks, they will become ketotic. Some take a very long time. I'm wondering, is there certain underlying mechanisms before someone begins a ketogenic diet they should look at, maybe liver pathways or anything else that you would kind of recommend?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it doesn't have a simple answer.
No.
So what I have observed is that women in particular kind of have a hard time transitioning from a carbohydrate-based diet to a carbohydrate-restricted ketogenic diet. They tend to, I don't know if this is a kind of a perceived effect psychologically, whether it's altering, the balance of neurochemicals in the brain, or if there's a physiological, difference there. We actually we do experiments in the lab, and we do see that females are just generally more variable across the board. It's definitely clear. And that's why experiments, when you read an experimental protocol that uses animals, it typically always uses males, because the predicted outcome is is much more predictable, the physiological outcome. What I've seen is that women tend to go hypoglycemic really quick. Yeah. So males, and I think this would also may apply to female athletes. People who are more athletic probably are bouncing in and out of ketosis, post-exercise ketosis. You might be familiar with. You're depleting, prolonged exercise will deplete glycogen stores, and then you'll go into a more of a mild state of ketosis. Now, people who are used to doing this, I find can quickly adapt to a ketogenic diet and start to derive some of the benefits, whether it be performance or cognitive, much quicker than someone who's sedentary, who's on a carbohydrate-based diet. So, is there any biomarkers that could predict whether someone that's hard to say, but I think typically if someone has really good blood glucose levels, like very controlled after a meal, they would typically have a good metabolic health. And by good metabolic health, I mean that they kind of from changing your diet and exercise perspective, they have good metabolic flexibility, I would say. So they would be more adaptable to a ketogenic diet and would become more readily fat adapted.
So what is the connection then between ketosis and the whole oxygen, since that's what really started this whole investigation for you?
Okay, well, oxygen is a neural stimulant and can cause a seizure, right? So I got into this studying the damaging effects of oxygen on the brain and the pulmonary system. So you have oxygen toxicity, which can manifest itself as CNS oxygen toxicity, which is a seizure, or pulmonary oxygen toxicity, which can damage your lungs and cause pulmonary edema. And this is very important problem from a military perspective, and in a clinical scenario, if someone's kept on like 100% oxygen or enriched oxygen, if you do that for a couple of days, they'll die because oxygen is actually toxic. So we need to be, to understand the mechanisms of why this occurs. So oxygen's a stimulant and can cause a seizure, but oxygen can also be very therapeutic. So we have hyperbaric oxygen therapy, right? In the process of studying the damaging effects of oxygen on the brain, I started looking at a variety of cell types and saw that cancer cells were more vulnerable to the high amounts of oxygen than your normal cells were. And I became really interested in that. And that kind of spun off to a separate project where, I went from looking at the damaging effects of oxygen to doing a little pet project, I guess, on the side, kind of at nighttime and just, in my spare time, just looking at the effects of high oxygen on cancer cells. And we have some unique tools in the lab that can allow us to do this. And I found it curious that no one had really stumbled upon this before, but no one really looks at oxygen at increased barometric pressure like we did. And I spent my postdoctoral fellowship actually developing technology that would allow us to do this. And in the process of doing that, we screened different cells and saw this observation in brain cancer cells. So that spun us off into another direction where we're actually looking at the therapeutic effects of oxygen, at least at killing cancer cells. And we found that ketosis, cancer cells cannot really readily adapt to deriving energy from ketone bodies. And we designed an experiment where we did the ketogenic diet and combined it with hyperbaric oxygen, because these are two things that were observed in our hands to be toxic to cancer cells. Well, I should state that the original Thomas Seyfried from Boston College was really the pioneer, and I became very fascinated by his work, which I thought was very elegant studies. And it was interesting because most of the cancer community is largely ignoring the work of Tom Seyfried and
metabolic cancer known as a metabolic disease, not a genetic.
It's very good work from a scientific point of view. And when I read his review, he has a review article that cancer is a metabolic disease. I couldn't find any flaws in his logic and his experiments. And I realized if this is true, this is very profound. And this is something that I wanted to study. So to replicate it, we designed our own experiment and used a very aggressive form of cancer and found that hyperbaric oxygen, which was something I was studying from a neurotoxicity point of view, actually had beneficial effects on a model of metastatic cancer when it was combined with the ketogenic diet. So you get like a 1-2 punch. Basically, the ketogenic diet will metabolically compromise the viability of the cancer cells
because the cancer cell doesn't have any metabolic flexibility. That is right.
Yeah, the more aggressive a cancer cell is, the more glycolytic it is, which means, the more, we might have some slow growing cancers, prostate cancer, for example, doesn't really show up very hot on a PET scan, which looks at sugar metabolism. But you look at like a glioblastoma, which is a rapidly, very aggressive brain tumor, and it lights up very bright on a PET scan. So the more aggressive a tumor, the more dependent it is on glucose. And if you, not only do you have to eliminate glucose, but if you just restrict the levels of glucose, you can actually kill the tumor tissue. So although we can't, lower the glucose in our bodies to hypoglycemic completely, the ketones can replace glucose as the primary fuel. So it can allow us to go into more or less a comfortable hypoglycemia, for example, a blood glucose of, 60 or 55 milligrams per deciliter, and sustain that comfortably. And that's where I'm at right now. I measured my glucose, and I'm about 58 to 60 right now, and I'm completely comfortable because my ketones are elevated. And so, producing that physiological state will put a lot of metabolic stress on cancer cells, but your normal cells. And when you've adapted your body to that physiology or produce that physiological state, the hyperbaric oxygen, hyperoxygenating tumor tissue can be destructive to tumor tissue relative to your normal cells. So we think that this is a really, a promising approach because it's non-toxic. The typical approach in cancer is to, surgery, chemo, and radiation. And, that's very invasive and it destroys your immune system. And we're not saying that this could be a replacement for cancer therapy, the standard of care, but it could be used as a standalone therapy to see if a patient responds, and if not, then it can be combined with other modalities like radiation and chemo, and would likely increase the efficacy of those things by weakening and compromising the cancer to begin with.
Yeah, 100%. Have you even seen any, there's a lot of studies, I've read maybe 2 lately, of how ketone bodies actually help increase intracellular glutathione levels within the body.
Yeah, the ketones definitely have antioxidant properties, and they do that through a variety of mechanisms. And I think you can just go to the very basic level that ketones may have direct antioxidant effects, but more importantly is that they enhance mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation and the bioenergetic potential of the cells. And if a cell's energy production pathways are stimulated and kind of the cell becomes more resilient under forms of stress and can maintain its endogenous antioxidant status. So, simply by, enhancing the metabolic machinery of a cell, it can better preserve and defend itself by upregulating its antioxidant mechanisms.
Fascinating. So when someone's actually looking at the ketogenic diet, is there certain tips or tricks or suggestions you can tell somebody to implement right away? Meaning, a lot of people think that the ketogenic diet is just, I'm just going to eat meat and vegetables and that's it. But that's not the reality of things. So what's the main key factors one should consider when approaching a ketogenic diet?
Well, I think people need to step back and talk and think about what they want to accomplish with a ketogenic diet. What's your goal? Whether it be the management of seizures, the metabolic management of some pathology, whether it be cancer or neurological disorder, or just simply maybe getting your blood glucose under control, reversing type 2 diabetes, or weight loss, or enhancing your athletic performance. So I think that needs to be kind of appreciated and realized first, because that would determine the strategy. If you have very severe seizures, you might actually want to do a therapeutic fast to quickly get your body into ketosis.
But that's something interesting you just hit, though. A lot of people talk about intermittent fasting. I know Thomas Seyfried talks about calorie restrictions, and also he does fasting. So what is that combination? So you're suggesting that also implement a semi-intermittent fast or fasting protocol with the ketogenic protocol.
Yeah, well, the question that you're bringing up now is kind of an area of intense debate, and it might not be a one size fits all sort of thing. And I think a lot of research needs to be done. But what we do know is that Thomas Seyfried is a big believer in calorie restriction, and I am too, although we did a study where the animals were fed the ketogenic diet ad libitum. So they had free access to as much high-fat food as they wanted. And they maintained their weight, but maybe lost about 10% of their body weight relative to the high-carb diet. And we found that, they achieved, very nice therapeutic efficacy as far as increase in survival. So the question is, is calorie restriction needed, and how important is that to get the benefits of it? From a cancer point of view, this is a tricky question, because if someone has a BMI of like 19 or 20, you don't want to restrict their calories, right? But if someone, a number of patients came and their BMIs were like 28, 30, 35, and these are patients where you want to implement a calorie-restricted ketogenic diet, and they would respond very well because they have the adipose stores, and when calories are restricted, especially with carbohydrate restriction, your body is going to mobilize those fatty acids. So you're just going to be pulling off your own fat stores for energy and making ketones from there. Although a lot of patients implementing this are doing it as a last-ditch effort. They've already gone through standard of care. They may have failed standard of care, so they don't want to further restrict calories. In that case, the calories need to be titrated in to maintain their body weight. And ketones are protein-sparing, so it'll actually help them. And then you had the situation with kids, with drug-resistant seizures with kids, and you don't want to stall their growth and development. So you need an educated person to come in, and someone who's educated, or a dietitian who's educated in the ketogenic diet. And there's really not, I went through a nutrition science program, and the ketogenic diet was just bad. That's what they taught us. So they're probably still teaching it that way, but not really appreciating this, the therapeutic effects. So it's a grossly underutilized approach. I'm not saying I don't think everyone should eat a ketogenic diet, but I think they should do, relative to how we're taught to eat, they should do some form of carbohydrate restriction, either all the time or every once in a while. Just restrict carbohydrates, not full-blown ketosis, but maybe
cyclic.
I don't like to use the word paleo diet as much because it may not reflect exactly, but a paleo-like diet is pretty close, or the one that's advertised is pretty close to the way I actually ask people to eat. Or I say a grain-free, low-carb Mediterranean diet, is a good way to eat, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So what is then the connection with the MTOR? Some people talk about being a positive, something positive we should focus on, and others, I know Dr. Ron Rosel talks about this, is we should really watch our eye out for MTOR and leptin as well.
Yeah, the MTOR is a big debate, and I get this question a lot, actually, because there's a lot of people studying MTOR. So if in our animal model, what we found that if you give an mTOR activator like leucine, a branched chain amino acid, and feed it at a high concentration, you actually get like a trend for survival advantage. We are doing these studies now, but it definitely doesn't, in our hands, giving branched chain amino acids, especially high amounts of leucine, which is a potent mTOR activator, does not increase the growth of cancer. But mTOR can increase skeletal muscle protein synthesis. So leucine can actually recommend that patients use branched chain amino acids in and around meals, and maybe even in between meals, to stimulate protein synthesis, sort of an anti-catabolic, countermeasure that can preserve muscle under periods of calorie restriction or periods of stress, cancer cachexia being one of them. Yeah. So, there's the mTOR debate is when people talk about mTOR, most of the literature on mTOR is kind of negative in regards to cancer growth and proliferation, and it's a powerful stimulator of that. But leucine and branched chain amino acids have not been linked to, the growth and development of cancer.
So I
But they
think it
have
comes
been
down
linked
to
to
then like
skeletal muscle protein synthesis. So I'd like to
environment
add
though.
that.
You're talking about like cancer and mTOR may not be a positive thing, yet
Yeah.
if you're a healthy individual, you want mTOR for say protein synthesis, branched chain amino acids, fantastic for that. So I think it really
Yeah.
matters on the context and the environment that we're speaking of. It's a double-edged sword, right?
Actually, yeah. That's a good point. Um, you know, Insulin sensitivity will affect mTOR signaling, AMP kinase, IGF-1, and all these factors can actually be a carbohydrate restriction can enhance insulin sensitivity. We know that. So in the situation where you have carbohydrate restriction, you can promote insulin sensitivity and glucose disposal into the skeletal muscle in a way. So you have translocation of the GLUT4 transporter and skeletal muscle, and so the carbohydrates you eat are more efficiently disposed of, utilized as fuel. So I think the mTOR situation is, and I've kind of debated this with a number. I don't think so. This kind of goes back to high protein diets, right? High protein diets being linked to cancer. What I used to eat a tremendously high protein diet. I think it was probably like there were some days where I had over 500 grams of protein when I was younger, and I was really into lifting and kind of eating 6 meals a day. So what I do now is I eat a lot more fat, and I eat 2 meals a day. And the last meal I had was 12 hours ago. I'm not hungry at all. I have a lot of energy, and I never thought that was possible, but it's possible because I'm giving my body a lot of fat for fuel. And what I've found is that, if I continue to go to the gym and train, my strength is retained and my lean body mass is retained. And this really blows my mind. And I did it. It's been more of a progressive thing. I think I went from like 6 meals a day to like 4 and then down to 3. And then, the last year or two, I've been like 2 meals a day. So I've been able to, if I continue training, I can maintain my level of strength. And I would have never guessed that. And what that has taught me is that I was eating way too much protein unnecessarily. Now, if I wanted to really increase my strength and increase my size, I would definitely need to add probably a third meal in there somewhere, or just bump up my calories overall. But I believe that protein was. I have to kind of admit that protein is overrated, and I was just for years I was telling everyone eat as much protein as possible to gain muscle, to gain. And I have to, take that back and just say I was wrong, and that I probably eat about a third of the protein that I used.
So what would a typical meal in Dominic's life look like? So people wondering, well, wait a second, he's eating high fat. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. Okay. Well, it varies from day to day, but this morning I had 4 eggs, and I had some Parmesan cheese and mushrooms, and I cooked it in a pan with a tablespoon of olive oil, and actually had that with a can of sardines.
Nice.
And when I made my omelet, actually I have pork rinds, a big tub of them, and I crush them up into powder, and then I mix it in like with my omelet. So I make an omelet that has the pork rinds in it, and I have usually some broccoli or asparagus on the side, and then a can of sardines. So, and I have butter in my coffee in the morning. So we're looking at the macronutrient ratio is a ketogenic diet, probably about a 2-to-1 ketogenic diet. If you're familiar with the ratios, like 4-to-1, 3-to-1, 2-to-1, kind of like a less kind of strict ketogenic diet, a 2-to-1 ratio. So pretty heavy on fat. And I tend to cook with a lot of butter and whole eggs, obviously, and the sardines are packed in oil. So the protein's pretty high, but for a ketogenic diet, but for that meal. And then throughout the day, I will get some MCT oils or some butter in my coffee. So it's basically fat throughout the day. I might get some branched chain amino acids during the day, midday, and then tonight I'll have a salad with a lot of olive oil and maybe a little bit of Parmesan cheese on top, and either some form of fatty chicken, beef, or fish. I eat a lot of fish, so I've been phasing out kind of chicken and beef and kind of eating a lot more fish and nuts. And I
What's
kind
the
of
reasoning behind that? Just for the omegas and maybe mineral composition, or?
Yeah, I just feel better eating fish. And I used to eat red meat probably every single day, multiple times a day, and now I just get it a couple times a week. And I'm kind of moving away towards moving towards eating lower on the food chain a little bit. I'm going to start experimenting actually with different sources of protein. Maybe even at the last Ancestral Health Symposium I went to, they were marketing insect protein.
I saw that.
Protein powder. Yeah. So I want to actually start incorporating that into our diet studies we're doing in rodents, because that would more reflect right now the diet is actually that everyone's using for research is a casein-based diet. So we're giving, a bovine milk to in our rodent studies. But I'd actually like to incorporate some protein that would be more natural part of their diet and kind of develop a diet that would reflect what they would naturally eat. And I think, I don't know, from what I read, humans kind of were eating insects for.
Oh yeah, we love those grubs.
Yes. So I think it seems like an environmentally friendly. There's some pretty good science behind it. Yeah. Not only the environmentally friendly aspects of it, at least that's what's being talked about, but also the amino acid profile of the protein is pretty good. So
now, what's your take then on the whole ketosis going in and out of it? Right, I'm a big believer in seasons, but obviously if you live in a summer season, then it's only summer. But for example, I live in a 4-season here, so I have winter time. So I like to be more ketotic in the winter and more higher carb in the summer. So what's your take on that, on the physiological response to the body?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's what I used to do when I lived in New Jersey, right? Because you just have readily available a lot of fruits and vegetables. We had a big garden. I grew up on a farm, actually, so that stuff was readily available. I think that's a good idea, and I think our bodies are accustomed to change, and I'm all about changing up the diet and not eating a certain pattern, whether it be meal pattern, macronutrient ratio. I think we need to change it up a lot, and forcing our bodies to be metabolically flexible like that will make us more resilient. And I think as far as change and even exercise too, I think it's good. So you have guys that do like carbohydrate restriction throughout the day, and then they do carb backloading.
Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with Kiefer's work on that.
Oh yeah, Kiefer. Yeah, I've talked to him and did a podcast with him, I think. I think it depends on what your goal is, but I think people need. I always tell people to experiment. But if your goal is to get as big and strong as possible, following a ketogenic diet is not going to be optimal. No. But say you are, I don't know, like a bodybuilder and like 250 pounds, but you have like 20, 30 pounds of fat to lose. I would actually recommend a pretty strict ketogenic diet, depending on the time frame that you have to lose, because I would recommend ketosis and maybe a small amount of carbs intra and post workout, because I think giving even 20 grams of carbohydrates intra or post workout has a very profound anti-catabolic effect. But if you have a lot of muscle, you'll quickly get back into ketosis.
This would be then a perfect position for a person to maybe be thinking of using ketone salts, something that you've been studying and researching as of late.
Yeah, that's right. I think the application of ketone salts would be, there's many different applications. One could use it to make the transition to the ketogenic diet more tolerable, to increase compliance. They do have an appetite suppression effect. And the literature suggests that they have a protein sparing effect. So one could further restrict calories and probably preserve lean body mass if they're doing that. And in the same process, the ketones would enhance athletic performance, and I think fuel supply to the muscle. And it would help with those periodic bouts of hypoglycemia that you might have initially.
So this is pretty much like instant ketones in your blood right away with the ketone salts.
Yeah, you can get readings within about 10-15 minutes.
Wow.
Of an increase. So it's almost like, giving glucose. You can measure glucose. Say you were to drink, sucrose or glucose solution and just measure your glucose within about 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes, you'll see it bounce up really quick. You'll see it on the meter. And the same thing with the ketone salts. Now, MCTs have been used for that application. So MCTs are great. I actually recommend MCTs are a super source of fuel. I find that about 20% or more, maybe even as high as 30 or 40% of people just cannot tolerate even 1 tablespoon.
I concur 100%. I see that in my practice every day.
Yeah. So that's problematic. And I think where ketone salts, you have the potential to go above and beyond the ketone levels that MCTs do. But what I do, I actually combine them because I think the MCTs can slow the MCTs are like a sustained delivery system. So you take ketone salts and mix it up with MCTs, some branched chain amino acids, and that can delay gastric emptying, and you have more of a nice pharmacokinetic profile of your blood ketone levels. And I think people need to experiment with that. I have the ketone salts that are available now are very prototype in their in their formulation, and I think they're actually sold by the Prototype company, Prototype Nutrition, and I know Patrick Arnold. He's the one who's making this, and I'm working with him on developing them, and I think he's got a lot of things in the pipeline and putting this into a more of a powdered formulation that would be more palatable and more tolerable. So
how's the taste of the ketone salts?
Yeah, the liquid form tastes like sweat.
Oh my God.
But they can be, the good thing is that you can take them, dilute them, take 30 milliliters and dilute it into 400 milliliters, a pint, something like that, and mix and throw your branched chain amino acids in there and add some kind of sweetener, and it tastes fine. Actually, when you dilute it, it actually tastes a little bit salty, but that's kind of a good thing. And you want to pH it with something like citric acid or malic acid, which you can buy in bulk readily from anywhere, and just make it slightly acidic. And I would do a variety of non-calorie sweeteners like SodaStream or just sugar-free lemonade, something like that. You can add to it and tastes pretty good.
Awesome. Now, when someone's measuring their ketones, so there's 2 forms. You got a ketone meter for the blood, right, to measure hydroxybutyrate, and then we have urinary for acetoacetate. Obviously, the blood one is more accurate, right?
Yes.
Awesome. And now, I know some people say 1-to-1 ratio between that and glucose. Is there certain markers or levels that you like to see to truly identify if a person is in ketosis?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that needs to be appreciated because I've talked to a lot of people who said they're on a ketogenic diet, they're in ketosis, and I asked them how they know, and they're like, "Well, I'm following a ketogenic diet." So, but they didn't measure their ketone levels. Yeah. So, I think the best way to measure would be blood ketones. At this point in time, I'm experimenting with different ways. I have a breath ketone meter. I'm working with, and a variety of urine strips, and then a variety of meters. I find that Precision Extra meter is not ideal, but it's actually one of the best out there. And if the meter is reading 0.5 millimolar or higher, that in my opinion suggests that you're in ketosis. So it would be very rare for a person to be 0.5 or above following a diet that's not carbohydrate restricted. And at that level of ketosis, your brain is actually definitely seeing an alternative fuel source, and you're deriving some of the benefits. So you really have to be restricting carbohydrates, and your insulin has to be low for your body to be making ketones to elevate it above 0.5. Now, optimal levels can be debated, but I think one should shoot for about 1 to 3 millimolar of ketones. And, just resting here, sitting in my office, if I'm, towards the end of the day, my ketones may get above 3 and towards 4, especially if I've restricted protein or calories earlier in the day, or to just taking a lot of MCTs. And I think once my ketones get really high, like 4, 5, 6, I start feeling a little bit drunk even. But as soon as I start moving, my body sucks up the ketones, and I feel that they're readily oxidized as fuel. And you see that in athletes that are working out, their ketone levels will drop if they go from sedentary. They build up in the system, but once you start moving, that's fuel that your brain and your muscles, your central nervous system and your muscles can readily use. So I tell people that to try, if they're really honestly trying the ketogenic diet, try to get to 1 millimolar or above, and then you'll really start seeing the benefits. But you'll probably derive benefits.
At least once a week, they should be doing a blood for ketones and urine maybe every other day.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would tell them. I would, the blood meters the strips can be kind of pricey, about $5 a strip, and you can get them for as low as $2 if you shop around. But yeah, the urine strips are fairly reliable indicator. I just have access to the blood meter, so I primarily do blood. But when I have done blood and compared it to urine, it's fairly close. It's surprisingly accurate. I think the urine ketone strips get a lot of criticism from people saying they're not a really good indicator, but our lab has shown that they're fairly reliable, give or take about 20%. The gold standard is, various assays in the lab, and we do that too. And what's nice is that we can compare breath ketones to blood to urine to, an enzymatic assay to like gas chromatography. So we take, and we'll do that all on one sample. Sometimes we do a variety of.
You mentioned though that you're just playing around with a breath one, so I'm really quite fascinated about that.
Yeah, there's Medtronics is a company that makes a breath acetone measurement. So acetone is a breakdown product of acetoacetate, and it's not quantitative. But it will tell you if your ketone levels are above like 2. Okay. So you have to be in pretty heavy. The meter that I have, you have to be. I saw Ben Greenfield kind of, demonstrated one in a YouTube video the other day, and a number of my friends have, tried them because they've connected with a company, and it's promising. It's the right direction to go into, something a little less invasive. And I saw another device on the market that you can plug into your phone or cool. a USB, and it was quantitative. It had like 5 different colors. And
it measured hydroxybutyrate from the
ketonics. No, they measure, you blow into a device that's connected electronically to your computer or your phone, I believe, and then it measures breath acetone levels. But it does it quantitatively. And it was maybe in Germany they had this available. So some savvy entrepreneur developed something, and I know there was a couple, I remember looking into this a few years back, a couple patent applications on this, because I thought, wow, this would be the way to go. If you have some device you just plug into your phone, breathe into it, it has an app that, reads your ketone levels. That would be ideal.
That's fantastic. Now, the only question I have, though, is a lot of people get it too. A lot of people have an issue of this transition phase, meaning, they start the ketogenic diet. Maybe they have the blood ketone meters a year, and they're really hyped to start this. But there's that phase where it's super hard for some. They may be coming off, the glucose high, and their body's trying to transition from burning glucose into using ketones instead. Is there any types of tips or strategies that one can implement during that transition phase?
My advice would be to like suck it up and get through it.
Good advice.
Yeah. Well, I can't put myself in other people's shoes because my body is just a fat burner, I guess, because I've readily adapted to it. And I kind of admit I eased into this as I discovered the benefits of carbohydrate restriction. I went through a period where I just took out pasta and grains and lived off that and was still eating sweet potatoes and beans. And then I eliminated that and was ultimately moving towards like a high protein, high veggie, moderate fat diet. And then so it's been a gradual transition to me, and I've always been active, but I have observed in a number of people their transition from a carb-based diet to a ketogenic diet, and it was scary. Like sometimes they were fainting or, sometimes they would just say, I feel awful. I can't concentrate. I can't even drive my car. I feel like I'm going to run into something. And in those cases, I think MCTs, I think a product like Keto Force could really help them. Yeah, I think, if used for the first couple weeks, ultimately I think these ketone salts will become inexpensive, and they'll definitely become more popular just because they have such great applications, and not only for transitioning into the ketogenic diet, but also for cognitive benefits, maybe anti-cancer effects, a whole host of different things. So my just getting back to your question, my advice would be to use MCT, and because MCTs really do elevate ketones, they're great, and get an MCT product that is higher in caprylic acid, which is the 8-carbon MCT. It's a little more ketogenic, and I would liberally use fat. Some people who go on a ketogenic diet, they're just kind of scared of fat, and they're following a higher protein, carbohydrate restricted diet, kind of protein and veggies. And if your brain's not getting that fat, you're just going to feel awful. So getting the fat in there really has a satiating effect on the brain and a calming effect on the brain. I mean, I eat in the morning, and then by 2 in the afternoon, once the fat hits my system from coffee or MCT or whatever, I just feel pretty relieved. Actually, just straight MCT can actually make me jittery and kind of nervous. Like it, especially if I'm sitting at my desk, because it's almost giving my body so much energy that or just an oral form of ketone, whether it be, Keto Force and MCT together. So usually I like to combine it with, some kind of longer chain fatty acid.
That's fantastic.
But yeah, be liberal with the fats. And you might even want to bump up your calories above maintenance level, when you transition into this, and then titrate it back down. So if you go on a calorie restricted ketogenic diet initially from a carb-based diet, you're going to be hurting. You're going to be hurting. Especially if you're combining it with exercise and stuff too, because your muscle glycogen will be depleted. And then when you go to exercise, it's like a double. And expect the sharp decrease in exercise performance too initially. And people don't want to hear that. And that's been the criticism of the ketogenic diet. It depletes your glycogen stores, and then you just bonk. But what happens is that it becomes very protein sparing and even glycogen sparing. And your body does pretty well at being able to restore and maintain glycogen in the muscle. Your liver stores always stay a little bit depleted with a strict ketogenic diet. But what you'll find, depending on the exercise that you're doing, prolonged endurance exercise, you can sustain performance much longer because you're sparing glycogen because you're more fat adapted. And I think once you're fat adapted, in elite athletes, they can actually supplement carbohydrates during the exercise, and I think your body will use them more efficiently as fuel.
Yeah, it all depends on your sport. If you're, a triathlete or long distance, definitely I see benefit for, keto adaptations. We're using carbs in and out here and there for optimal performance. If you're a bodybuilder, as we were mentioning earlier, most people, you need insulin for hypertrophic growth for most of the time. So
absolutely,
that may not be the best choice. If you're doing some powerlifting, such as I do here and there, you can definitely use a ketogenic diet for optimal strength gains. Like,
Yeah.
For sure, 100%. It all depends on your sport. If your sport is more of like a cyclic sport, ketogenic diets are profoundly beneficial. If it's more for like Olympic lifting, maybe you can use it on off season as a tool.
Yeah. It really depends on your application, and I think it shines when you need to make weight. So say you're about 10, 15 pounds overweight, and even if you're a strength athlete, we published a paper on this and just showing that you have optimal and even superior strength retention with a drop in weight with a ketogenic diet, more so than a carbohydrate-based diet. If you just restricting calories from a carbohydrate.
That's 100%. I had the same experience. I'm 184 on the dot right now. I was max. I weighed 201 at one point, and honestly, my strength doubled, but my weight dropped.
Wow.
Right. So I just checked a couple of days ago. I can do my 525 deadlift, almost 420 squats. So. And I'm only a $180. And honestly,
wow, yeah, that's really good.
I attribute a lot of my strength and my adaptation towards a ketogenic diet. But at the same time, I use it as a tool as well. There's an implication as you application as you just suggested. So really use it as application and don't go into blindly. Have an end result. Like, what's the reason you're going in this? If it's for general health, well, maybe running a 4-season protocol is great. Maybe 2 months you're like that, and the other months you're not. If it's for a sport, figure out what's the end result of your sport and really use it that way. But don't go blindfolded in and just, I'm doing it for the sake of just doing something.
Yeah, do it with a purpose, and I'd recommend a lot of self-experimentation, measuring ketones and in glucose too, and consulting with as many people as possible on how they did it. It's been more of a gradual, like for my deadlift, for example, which I think is a good measure of overall strength. I did 675 for 4 at 225, and when I was younger, I kind of maxed out. I weighed 275 and I did 675 for 4. So at 50 pounds lighter,
that's huge.
After this is about 10 years later, at 50 pounds later, I was able to go back and hit my personal record at a body weight of 50 pounds less. That could have been training. There might have been other factors involved, but my body weight, was less. And I think that's remarkable. I never thought I could have done that on a low carbohydrate based diet.
That's amazing.
I would have never even attempted that. So
it makes you think twice. So anyone out there listening right now or watching this, don't be scared and think, maybe the ketogenic diet will hinder my result. Dom and I just showed you that there is possibilities of extreme strength gain, performance, and also we even touch base on the longevity factors, etc., etc. So there's a lot of validity to this. Dom, I want to thank you so much for coming on board and educating everybody about the ketogenic diet, ketosis, and the pretty awesome, fascinating new stuff, the ketone salts. I'm going to start experimenting with that myself in the near future. Where can people reach you at?
Well, I have a website that it just set up to put information for people to contact me, just based, for the research that I do. It's called ketonutrition.org, and all one word, Keto Nutrition. And I don't really sell anything. I don't, I'm in a position at University of South Florida College of Medicine, and I do have a faculty profile on there with my the publications that I have and the research that we're doing in our lab. So I just ask that if people are interested in the ketogenic diet, not only for performance and strength, but if they know someone who is trying to manage a neurological disease or cancer, it could be an effective way to metabolically manage a disorder. And that's kind of my interest in the direction that we're going into now. And aside from the military application, which is looking at
that's super exciting,
physiological and cognitive resilience under stress. So that's a whole nother area there. So
awesome. Well, once again, thank you so much for coming on board and educating us about the ketogenic diet. Till next time, Dom, have an amazing day, brother.
Thanks for having me, Ameer. Appreciate it.